welcome to the Karen Kenney Show. This is the place where we take a no bullshit look at life's little lessons. Here, together, we find the spiritual glory in even the most wicked hard story. This is a journey from fear back to love and how we can find our greatest strength and happiness in some of the most unlikely places. I believe that if you're willing to change your mind, you can totally change your life. So, are you ready to rewrite your story and choose to live free? Let's do this. Hey, you guys. Oh my God. Holy moly. I'm so excited. Welcome to the very first episode of the Karen Kenney Show. You guys, seriously, I have been talking about doing this for like a gazillion years. My poor sweetie, my husband, Chris Lester, who's a professional musician, he recorded podcast music for me years ago. And I've been talking about doing it, threatening to do it. And here we are, you guys. This is the big launch, and I'm so jazzed to be here. And I'm so psyched that I finally get to have the culmination of this vision and this dream and to share it with all of you. So here's the deal. Because it's episode 1, some of you guys already know me. Thank you. I love you. And some of you are like, who is this broad? We have no idea who this person is. So I'm going to take time on this episode to drop a little about me, who I am, what's my story. It's kind of funny. As a masshole, those of you who are listening, you can't see that I have my my masshole t-shirt on. But I'm a kid from Lawrence, Massachusetts. I'm a Boston kid. And so, when we were younger, whenever we would see somebody at a party or at school or whatever, at a sporting event, and we would just be checking them out, and we'd always go, what's their fucking story? What's her story, right? So I get to tell you a little bit about my story and who I am and what this show is about and why I'm so jazzed about it. Okay, so number 1, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy life to listen. I know you could be anywhere else right now, and the fact that you're choosing to spend a little time with me makes me wicked happy, not gonna lie. All right, so here's the deal. I'm Karen Kenney. And, what I do in the world for work. And here's the thing about Americans especially. We're a little obsessed about what do you do? It's one of the first things we ask people. We ask them their name. We ask them where they live. Sometimes we ask them if they're married or they have kids. I always ask them if people have pets and animals because that's what I really love. And then we always go, what do you do? I always say to people, I do a lot of things, right? I do a lot of things, but what they really mean is how do you make your money? What are you doing for work? Okay, so I'll just start there. So I am a spiritual mentor. I'm a writer. I'm a speaker. I'm a storyteller. That's kind of what I do in the world. My ministry and my mission is to help people let go of their old stories. So I always say I help people to get the fuck out of their own way and to move from their story to their glory. All right. And so I do that in my mentoring programs. I do it at the retreats I teach at. I do it when I speak on stage. Right. It's that's what I do. It's part of my ministry, my mission, my message, and my movement. It's what I'm excited about. It's helping people, who have had a hard time. I always say, I work with people who have had more than their fair share of wicked hard shit happen to them. And I help them to lead a life like nothing bad has ever happened. And that doesn't mean that we abandon our dead and that we don't, that we just kind of we rewrite the story like it never happened in the fact that we don't want to pay honor or respect or reverence, to where we came from. I always say in order to know where you're going, you got to know where you're coming from, right? So it's not about that, but it's about being able to kind of transform the way that you think about that old story. As you heard in my intro, I always say, if you can change your mind, you can change your life. So it's not about abandoning our old stories, right? It's about, though, being able to look at them with a new perspective. and to be able to glean from them, right, the gifts that they hold. And that's what I always say, like we look back and we find that within our greatest wounds, right, that the hard stuff, like the wicked hard stuff that happens in this human experience is that that's where we actually find our greatest strength. And also, ultimately, we can find our happiness through the overcoming, the transformation, the you can call it like ascension, right? It's kind of like what we call in the Course in Miracles, and I can talk to you a little bit about that in a little bit too. A Course in Miracles, like transcending the battleground, right? Going above the battleground. So we take what was helpful, and then we let go of the rest. Okay, so that's kind of what I do in the world. I'm married to my sweetie. my sweetie is my husband, Chris Lesta, who is a wicked talented professional musician. He's a multi-instrumentalist. He plays guitar, bass, mandolin, keyboards, a little bit of drums, anything I give him mostly. He doesn't play like cello or anything like that, and I've never seen him play a horned instrument, but he can play all kinds of other things. He's also an incredible singer, songwriter, and producer. We have 7 furry kids, no human kids, 7 furry kids. We have 4 dogs, 2 cats, and a bunny. You guys, it's crazy up in here. I've been vegan for over 16 years. He's been vegan, I think, around 12 years maybe, something like that. So we really love animals up in here. I'm a big proponent of animal rights. I'm a big proponent of animal rescue. And I think about it like, people always give vegans a bad rap. And I often hear this, like, listen to this. I often hear people say that vegans think they're fucking better than everybody else. Like, they think we're all high and mighty and that we're judging everybody and we think we're better than everything else. But here's the reality, you guys. Here's the thing with vegans. We don't think we're better than everybody else, including animals. That's the whole point. We don't think we're better than everybody else. We don't take an arrogant stance like, oh, animals are just products and they're here for us to use and abuse and like entertain us and put them to work and feed. Like, we don't take that stance at all. We think animals have their own right to live a happy life, free from abuse, rape, suffering, murder, slaughter. You know what I'm saying? so we won't go too far into that. We'll do an episode later on. I'm going to have some incredible guests, you guys. So mostly these shows are going to be me talking to you mano y mano or womano y womano. Is that even a thing? So we're going to be talking like that. And then once in a while, maybe once a month or more, I'm not sure, but once a month, I'm going to have a super special guest. And these are going to be people, you guys, that I either am fascinated by, they have an incredible story, because that's really what the heartbeat of what this podcast and this video cast, the Karen Kenney Show, is about. It's about spirituality and storytelling. It's about taking a look at life's, as I said, is life's little like lessons. And it's like taking a fearless, no bullshit look about this is what went down. This is what we overcame. This is where I'm at now. And finding the universal message, the universal experience in very personal stories. And man, do I know some people with some pretty incredible stories. And I can already tell you that one of my friends, Jordan David, from Conscious Muscle, who's like an incredible advocate. He has an animal rescue group. He's also a vegan bodybuilder. He's already said yes. Like today alone, just today alone, I got 3-4 pretty spectacular yeses for upcoming guests on the show. But it's a surprise, so I'm not going to tell you. But just know we're going to have some pretty cool guests on the show. And so just, tune in. And it's interesting too, because I'm not doing a show where it's like, one particular thing, right? It's not a podcast about movies. It's not a podcast about business or branding. It's not a podcast about like religion. It's not a podcast about cats, although I would love to talk about cats. So it's really just going to be a podcast about this human experience, like being a spiritual being, but having the human experience and what it's like to be down here and to be like, kind of like I always say, like the way that they make stones, like precious stones, like shiny, is they take these rough rocks, right, that they dig up from the ground, and then they put them in like this spinner thing, and what happens is the rocks like they rub up against each other and they become more smooth. they become shiny and smooth. It's like they get rid of their rough edges. So part of this experience is going to be talking to some people who have been through some rough stuff. And what are the shiny jewels, right, that they've taken from this experience of being human? What are some of the spiritual gifts that arise when you have been brought to your fucking knees? You know what I mean? And so it's not like, but please relax. Don't think it's going to be like, oh my God, a lot of trauma and drama. Because with me, it's kind of like having guests on that have done the work or are doing the work, right? That they're on what I call like that Rocky journey, right? Like Rocky Balboa. Like I always say, we all got a little Rocky in us. I always say, like, if you've got a physical body, then you are already an underdog, like, right? Because the journey of the physical body in this world is we're born, a bunch of wicked hard shit happens, and then we die. And look, don't get me wrong, a lot of beautiful stuff happens along the way too. But as soon as you're in a body, man, you're considered one of the underdogs because we know the ending and it is not in our favor, right? We are going down, right? But if you get that you're actually a spiritual being, that you are made of eternal love and light, and that death is not an ending, right? It's just part of the process. But what can we experience? Like, what is the glory that we can extract from being here and being in relationship to each other? And, you know, in A Course in Miracles, we kind of talk about it like this whole world is a classroom, right? And so, and we're going to have some obstacles and challenges and some stuff happen along the way. And this is where we all get our stories from, right? The experience of being human. And this is why, though, you guys, that we love art. This is why we love movies and books and music that tells stories. This is why we love dance, right? This is why we love the creative arts, because we're looking, because what the artists do, right? So Tolstoy says this beautiful thing. He said, art is transferring feeling from one heart to another. Art is transferring feeling from one heart to another. And what good art does is it separates, it removes the separation between the artist and the one who's creating the art and the one who perceives the art. It removes the separation. So there can be a universal experience in a very personal expression, which I think is wicked powerful. So a lot of times what a reader is doing in a book is a reader is saying, you know, show me through your story, right? Through whether it's your song, your poetry, however you create in the world, right? They're like, show me. Excuse me. And so, well, hold on 1 second. And hold on. And we're back. Okay. So Tim O'Brien, the great writer, if you guys don't know Tim O'Brien, some of you definitely know who Tim O'Brien is. You can Google him. He talks about it like this. He says, writers tend to be the kind of people who like to enter the mystery of things. Writers tend to be the kind of people who like to enter the mystery of things, right? And there's another great quote that I love that says, you know, try to be the kind of person upon whom nothing is lost. And that means we pay really close attention, not just what's said, but what is unsaid. And not just what is said, how it's said. So this is part of what this show is. It's an opportunity for me to talk to people and to enter into the mystery of things with them. Isn't that incredible? And I'm so excited, you guys. So I'm going to tell you a little bit now about my own story, why I'm called to do the work that I do. And sorry, this is my first time doing this, so I got to keep checking the time. Okay, so why I'm called to do the work that I do. And how I found myself here as a writer, as a storyteller, as a spiritual mentor. Like, what gives me, right? What gives me the right to try and help other people overcome their suffering and to transform, you know, their stories? Like, where did that desire come from? And I'm going to tell you. So for those of you who are watching this video cast, you can actually see the pictures and stuff behind me. For those of you who are at home who can't, I'll just describe a little bit about what they're seeing. So they're seeing over my, what hand is this? My right hand. They're seeing a picture of me like with my hands folded in front of me. My eyes are closed. It's a black and white. I'm standing on stage. I just got done speaking at an event. And over my other shoulder, there's a picture of little KK, little me with my mom. my mom who is reading a book to me. And then like there's a lovely passage next to that my sweetie wrote to me. He gifted me that for my 50th birthday this past October. You'll also see that there's some peacock pillows behind me, and the peacock story I'll save for another time. And then over here you see a beloved typewriter. I'm a writer, so I love typewriters. You see a picture of me, and look at you guys. It's fucking Oprah. Check it out. Me and the amazing Oprah. Little picture because Oprah has always kind of reminded me to go after my dreams, and meeting her was a lifelong dream. And that's, again, a story for another day. And then you also see these earmuffs. There's these carpenter earmuffs, you guys. These things are no joke. Like when I put these on, they're legit. Like I can't hear shit when I put these on, okay? And what these little suckers are is these are a homage. These are an honor, a nod to my writing mentor and beloved friend, Andre Debus III. And so I always like to kind of have these in the creative room because they remind me. If you haven't read his memoir, Townie, run out and buy it. He also wrote, he's written a bunch of incredible books, but he wrote a best-selling book called The House of Sand and Fog, and it was turned into a movie. Andre is the balls. So that's always just like a little nod to him. So that's what you're kind of seeing behind me. And all of these things have a story. They're here for a reason because they're part of my journey. They're part of where I have come from, and they're part of where I've been, and they're part of where I'm going. All right. So let's just kind of dive into that a little bit. So I told you guys, I'm from Lawrence, Massachusetts. So those of you who don't know, Lawrence, Mass is a tough little city. It's a little immigrant city, about 30 miles north of Boston, and it borders like the Merrimack River kind of runs through it. A river runs through it, right? and it's an incredible place to grow up. And I always say, like, it's kind of weird now living in New Hampshire. New Hampshire is the second whitest state. Bunch of white people here in New Hampshire. And when you're a kid that grows up in a multicultural, multilingual, lots of different shades of skin tones. Like there's just a totally different vibe, like mass holes, right? Totally different vibe down in Lawrence, Massachusetts. So I remember having a little culture shock when I moved from Lawrence to Boston. I went to BU, Boston University, and then I left there and I went to LA. So it was like city, city, city. And then my ass landed back here in New Hampshire, and I was like, where are all my people? Where are my people of color? Where are my people who look different than all these white people that I'm looking at? So anyways, so that's Lawrence. Lawrence had like a huge Spanish-speaking population, Puerto Rican, Dominican. We have people from Thailand, Vietnamese, the Irish, the French, the Italians. Like it was a beautiful, rich melting pot of people and influences. Okay. So that's where I grew up. And when I was, I always kind of go back to the way back. All right. So my biological father and my mother got divorced when I was very young, when I was like 2 years old. And then, my stepfather, who I consider my dad, my stepdad came onto the scene. And I always say my mother and my father, God bless them, they loved each other, but it was like the most volatile relationship ever. I always say my parents were young. My parents were beautiful. They were wicked smart in some ways and totally stupid in other ways. Like when it came to things like paying the bills and always keeping the lights on and having food in the house, shit like that. And it's funny because they both had good jobs. It weren't like they were bums. We didn't live off welfare and stuff like that. They just weren't that responsible. You know, my dad was a Wonder Bread man. My mother was an underwriter at an insurance agency. And my parents were young and vivacious, and they had a lot of passion and a lot of energy, and they went out dancing and they played cards, and my mother was an athlete. They were both athletic. My mom played softball, like, you know, up into her early 30s. And so they were cool. They were like the cool parents, like all the kids, like in whatever neighborhood we lived in, like they loved my mom, especially my mom. Like my mom was just like the light of the world. Like she just attracted like so many people. So my mother and father, as much as they loved each other, it was a very volatile household. I often say, like, grew up in a war zone. Like anybody else at home, raise your hand if you're feeling me, right? So a lot of us grew up in households where we kind of walked around on eggshells. We was a lot of like ducking of plates of food being thrown at dinner. it was a pretty intense environment, you know what I mean? And it was a second marriage for both of them. My stepdad had like 3 kids that he brought onto the scene. And my biological father went off somewhere. I don't know. He moved to, I think he stayed in Lawrence for a little while, but then he moved to Illinois and hooked up with another woman who had like 6 kids. And then he had a kid with her. So I had a half brother. So my parents, because they fought all the time, it was like he was always leaving. Like it was inevitably, it was like fight, some big trauma, and then he would be like out the door and gone. And I always say during one of these times, I always say it was like the 18th billionth time that they were separated. During one of these times, my dad wasn't living with us, and it was just me and my sister and my mother. And we lived on South Broadway in Lawrence. And we lived in a double-decker, for those of you who aren't familiar with the architecture of New England. A lot of us grew up in triple-deckers, like doink, 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 3 apartments stacked on top of each other. Some of us grew up in double-deckers. So what I found when I came to like New Hampshire, there was more like duplexes, like side by side. But like in Lawrence, especially the kids who lived, like the lower income kids, you know, we just kind of got used to the sound of people living above you and below you. Like there weren't mortgages. We all paid rent, right? Like I didn't really know many people whose parents like owned their houses. And maybe just because we didn't talk about their parents' finances, but I was a rent paying kid. You know what I'm saying? So we lived in a double-decker on Broadway. My father wasn't living with us, and it was just my mother and me and my sister. And downstairs lived my sister's best friend, Sue Turgeon, who to this day is still like my big sister. I love her to death. And so my mother and father were both in the same bowling league, and my mom was going out that night to go bowling. And so that was just pretty typical. My mother went out a couple of nights a week, but she was always usually home like around midnight, you know what I mean? And so this night was no different. I watched her get ready for a little while in the bathroom when I was a little kid. Like my mother was like, oh, you guys, my mother was the light and the love of my life. I always say she was like the sun to my universe. My mom had a gravitational pull that kind of like held my whole universe together. You know, she was like the compass that I used to navigate the world. And so I like adored my mom. So I remember watching her get ready for a little while. And then I went outside and she got done getting ready. And then she was like, you know, off for the evening. And so my sister and I would always like try to stay up later on nights when she was out, because now my sister was 13, about to turn 14, and I was 12. And so we didn't really need a babysitter anymore, but we would like hide. Like, so the way that the apartment was, is there was a big window that looked down on Broadway. And we had curtains, right? So we would kind of like always have one like being the lookout, you know, and then my mother would come home from wherever she was, playing bingo, hanging out with friends, going bowling at my auntie's, like wherever she was. And so she would like pull up outside. And my mother was no dummy. Like she would see the light on outside, right? She's like the blue glow from the television. So she would like come home and like we would book it. Like we would snap off the TV and like book it and like run to bed. And like I'd pull the covers up and I would try to pretend that I was asleep. And my mother always knew what we were up to. And so she always kissed us goodnight. And so she would come in and like she would always lean down, right? She would lean down and she would get really close to my face. And then and I would just try to pretend as hard as I could that I was sleeping. Look at me. Ooh, I would try to pretend that I was asleep. And she would always say, I know you're awake, you little shit. And we would just start laughing as she nuzzled my neck. It was one of my favorite things. I just loved it. But on this particular night, I didn't remember getting my kiss goodnight. I didn't remember any of that happening. So we woke up the next morning. This is May 7th, 1981. Woke up the next morning to find my sister. I got out of bed, I went into the kitchen, and I saw my sister standing in the doorway of my mother's bedroom. And my mom's bed did not look like it had been slept in. And so we just, you know, we went into investigative mode and we're like, all right, well, this is really weird. Because the thing about my mother is she wasn't a morning person. Like she did not like getting up for work in the morning. She had to be at her desk by 9. And she would always say to us, like before we left for school, she'd be like, make sure my ass is sitting at the table before you leave. I want a cup of coffee in my hand. You know what I'm saying? And we had never let her down. We always did that. And so it was really weird to find her bed not slept in. So we looked outside. Her car wasn't out front. I looked in the sink. There was no coffee cup. There was like no coffee having been drank in the house. And I looked in the ashtray and I'm like, there's no Marlboro snubbed out here. Like, what's going on? And so I was like 12. I would say I was a very naive and young 12-year-old. I was like a wicked tomboy, you know, just kind of like moving through the world, like whatever. And my sister was a wicked smart 13-year-old. She was a little bit older than her years, just kind of emotionally and mentally and stuff like that. And so we both assessed that this was something wasn't right, but I didn't know yet enough to like be scared or whatever. I just assumed she had an early client or something happened. I don't know, but it was no big deal. And my sister, you know, was like, you know, let's get ready to go to school. And I got ready. And when I was done eating my cereal, she was still in her pajamas. And I was like, we got to go. We're going to be late. And she said, no, you just go without me. So I went ahead. I went off to school. My sister stayed home, and I was just like counting the hours. Like, you got to remember, my mother was like my favorite person in the whole universe. And I was kind of a weird, shy, like sensitive kid. Like a lot of people, even to this day, they assume I'm an extrovert. Like if you meet me and you see me speak and you just think I'm an extrovert. And I always try to tell people I'm kind of an introvert, or what they now call an ambivert. Right? Ambivert or ambivert. It's like I'm a little bit of both, but I definitely have introverted qualities. And when I was a little kid, you guys, like I was so shy. Like I couldn't ever look people in the eye. I couldn't talk to people. My sister was literally like my translator. Like we would go to a restaurant and the waiter or waitress would be like, well, sweetheart, what do you want to eat? And I would just mumble. Like I'd look at my sister and mumble, and they'd say, what? And my sister would literally have to speak for me. I was like a weird kid. But I did well in school. Like I had straight A's. I was a good kid at school. I had a lot of friends. It's not that I wasn't like, you know, comfortable at school and stuff like that. But I was just like, my mom was like the person I trusted the most in the whole world. She was who I felt safe with. So I couldn't wait to get home to see her. So I got out of school and I like booked it home. And when I got upstairs, my sister was on the phone. I remember my sister had been home all day by herself. I have no idea like what went on. And I was just like, is Ma home yet? And she's like, no, she's not home yet. And then Sue Turgeon was a year older than my sister. So I was in 7th grade. My sister was in 8th grade. Sue Turgeon, who lived downstairs, was in freshman in high school. And Sue came home. She lived downstairs. And we didn't knock on each other's doors. We just moved in and out of the apartments at will whenever we felt like it. So Sue just kind of like came in. She said, where's your sister? And like I told her in the kitchen. And those two were whispering. I thought they were just talking about boy stuff. And then Sue, they talked for a little bit mysteriously. I tried to get my sister to give me some information. She wouldn't talk to me. Just told me to like get out of her face, basically. So like I grabbed some Twinkies and I went and I started watching TV. And so a few hours went by, and then we still hadn't heard from my mother. And then all of a sudden we heard a car door slam outside. And in the, you know, my sister had been, you know, calling around, trying to see if anybody had talked to my mom or seen my mom or whatever. So we just thought like, oh, Mom must have got the message. She, you know, she's home from work, like whatever the thing is. And we ran to the window. My sister and I like booked it. We ran to the window to see who was outside. And we looked down and we saw a car across the street. And it was he's not our real uncle, but we called him Uncle Ronnie. Ronnie Bonanno was driving the car, and my dad got out of the car and he came across the street. And, you know, he had a new girlfriend. We hadn't seen him in like a couple of months. And I was obsessed. Like, I was so afraid of my dad. My dad was wicked hard on us. My dad was kind of brutal. You know, my dad was the kind of guy who didn't allow for any weakness. My sister got the brunt of it. My sister got the brunt of his punishment. I learned kind of at a younger age how to adopt, right? It's why I had to like overcome being a people pleaser many years later, because I would kind of twist and contort myself. I call it Cirque du Soleil. I Cirque du Soleil'd myself into being whatever I thought he would love and accept. So, you know, I was just desperate for him to love me. So I had a bit of reverence and awe for my father, but it was mostly born out of fear. Because, you know, my dad never like punched us or anything like that, but he poked us a lot. He put us up against walls a lot. Mostly my sister, though. She bore the brunt of it because my sister had a smarty pants mouth, and she wouldn't stay quiet. If she had something to say, she said it, where I learned kind of like how to tuck tail and survive. I don't know. Like I look back and I just think like, holy shit. It was an intense fucking childhood, you guys. But anyways, my dad showed up then and I was psyched to see him because I hadn't seen him in a while. My sister was like, the hell's he doing here? So I ran down onto the porch to see my dad. And just as I got onto the porch and he got onto the porch, he was coming up. Sue Turgeon opened her door downstairs. And my father just gave her the look and said, go back inside. And like Sue knew better than to like, mess with my dad. So she did as she was told. And I threw my arms around my dad's waist. And I just remember kind of looking up at him. And, my dad was a Wonder Bread guy. And he still had on his uniform, but his shirt was unbuttoned. And my dad was meticulous with his uniform. So he always bleached his shirts. His undershirts, were like V-necks, white, like always pristine white. He ironed his clothes. My dad always looked good and smelled good. He was a good looking guy, My dad was Italian and Portuguese. And so my dad normally, like at this time, like May, that time of the year, he normally sometimes already had like a little bit of a bronze gold, like glow or like a golden tone to his skin. But when I looked at him in this moment, he didn't look right. He looked pale, like almost like green, like he looked off. And I just looked up at him and I remember smiling at him and seeing his work patches on his work shirt, and over one hat was the iconic Wonder Bread logo with the red, yellow, and blue dots, the little bubbles. And over his hat was a patch that in cursive it said Bob, like his name. And just so imprinted in my mind. And I remember looking up at that and wrapping my arms around and on his waist and smiling at him, but he didn't smile back at me. And he said, let's go, kid. Let's get upstairs. And so we went upstairs and my sister, as soon as he walked in, like my sister gave him the look and he basically pointed to the couch and he said, sit down. And I was like a trained puppy. So my ass sat right down on the fake leather couch. My sister took her sweet ass time, I always say. My sister inevitably did what he wanted, but she always like tried to do it on her terms. And she eventually sat down. And my dad just kind of sat on the coffee table in front of us and he wouldn't look at us. He just kept looking down. And like a whole minute or more went by. And I just remember thinking like I was kind of getting like nervous, like that inappropriate kind of like nervous laughter. Like I was starting to get nervous and like, oh, is he just going to tell us? And I just assumed that he had seen my mother. Like my mother had maybe her car broke down. Remember, this was back in the day. There were no cell phones. There were no beepers. This was like, payphone if you can find one situation. And I'm like, oh, maybe her car broke down or maybe she was in an accident and my dad just saw her. He's going to like tell us what's going on. And so a moment or two more passed. And all of a sudden, he just looked up at us and he said, look, I'm just going to tell you, your mother is dead. And that in that moment basically changed, it changed my whole world. My world was never the same again. And the story goes on and on and on, but I'm going to like wrap it up quickly to just say that what ended up happening is we came to find out, and I'm writing a book, you guys, little plug. I'm writing a memoir. I always say you can read it when the book comes out, right? All the details and everything that happened. But what ultimately ended up happening was we found out that my mother was murdered. My mother was brutally and violently beaten to death. She was kicked and punched to death and left to die on the side of the road. And it was really, really awful and really traumatic. And it changed the face of actually a lot of our community. It was a really, and I know, of course, it was a big deal, like within our family, but it was kind of like a big deal. The guy that killed her was a local businessman from a kind of a family, a successful family. And his family, of course, thought that he didn't do it. The police and everybody else thought that he did do it. So it was a pretty intense time. And from that, it was like, well, now what do we do? My mother's dead. And my stepdad didn't want us. And my biological father, who I didn't know, I didn't remember him. He couldn't afford to take us or feed us. He showed up eventually at some point. But the reality of it is like we weren't going to go live in Illinois with him. And so we ended up having to make the decision to go live with an aunt and uncle that I did not know. And I was with them for about 5 years. from the time I was 12 to the time I was 17, my sister moved out on her 18th birthday. She was out of there. So my sister moved out, got her own apartment. She was engaged. She ended up having her first son. And, she was kind of living her life. And I was 17 at my aunt and uncle's house. Like, what the fuck am I going to do? But I always knew that I wanted to go beyond. Like, I wanted to move out of Lawrence. And I love Lawrence. Like, man, I'm a proud Lawrencian. I'm proud I'm asshole. Like love being from there. But I always knew that I kind of wanted to find out, not necessarily in a huge way. So Boston was like a big enough leap, like 30 miles north, right? Like go to Boston. And so I basically got myself into school and I moved out of my aunt and uncle's house. And basically the day that I moved out of their house, I was on my own. So I was on my own from 17 on, like till now, till 50. So when I went off to BU though, here's the thing. Like after my mother died, and some of you might be able to relate to this. Like if you come from families where they don't talk about stuff, anybody, double hand raise, right? I came from a family where we didn't talk about stuff. So we never ever talked about my mother. We didn't talk about my mother. We didn't talk about her murder. We didn't talk about what happened. We weren't allowed when we were kids, right after this all happened, we weren't allowed to listen to the news. We weren't allowed to listen to the radio when the story about her trial and stuff came up. We weren't allowed to read the newspapers. It was literally like you guys, like my mother, boom, disappeared overnight. It was horrible. Let's just call a spade a spade. It was fucking awful and traumatic and dramatic. And I suffered a lot. I felt victimized a lot. I had a whole story, the dead mother story, right? That I carried around, like lugging my mother's dead body around behind me for a really long time. And part of it though, you guys, was this was a deal because I didn't know what really happened. And I always talk about it like this. It's like, I knew my mother was dead. I knew she had been killed, right? I somehow found out the name of the guy that killed her. I knew she was what had happened. But I didn't know what the hell happened. And that's what I needed to know. I was always a wicked curious kid. People often said that when I was a little kid, my mantra to my mom was, why mom? Why mom? Why mom? Why mom? Like that's all. I always wanted to understand why. And to this day, even this podcast, it's about why does man do what he does? Why do people do the things that they do, think the things that they think, say the things that they say? I'm fascinated by the choices that people make, either to excel and overcome, to be exceptional. And I don't find it as interesting like the victim story, but I am curious about people's origin stories. I'm always curious about like, all right, what the hell happened there? Like what went on there that would make a person do X, Y, and Z, that would make a person, make that choice? Why that would seem like a good idea? And when you start to understand somebody's story, I often say this, it's pretty hard not to have compassion for them, which ultimately can lead to forgiveness. And you might eventually even end up loving them. That's the power of story. So another part of my story, though, is that I was feeling very victimized. I was 17 years old. I was away at BU trying to navigate. Like I literally got dropped off the first day of college, and I was like, I had no idea. Like I was just a kid from Lawrence, right, on my own, like paying my college tuition, working a bunch of jobs, work-study program at BU, like just trying to figure it all out. I was clueless, you guys, like totally clueless, just like putting on a really brave, tough face. Because that's the thing about us Lawrence kids, like dukes up, man, dukes up. And we're going to just fucking fight our way through the world. We're going to do whatever we got to do. We'll get knocked on our ass a bunch of times, but you can guarantee we're going to get back up, right? So one of the things was I was suffering a lot. Imagine like your favorite person on the planet. And I know you guys can imagine this because there are a lot of you out there that have lost children or lost partners or lost lovers or lost significant others or lost a parent or a sibling, or even if you lost your dog who was your best friend. Like we all understand loss and grief. That is a universal experience. We all understand the significance of loss and grief. And losing your mom as a 12-year-old girl, like just as you're about to kind of tip into what becomes your womanhood, especially when you're a fucking weirdo, like hardcore tomboy like I was, like getting a period and bras and like sex and like moving into all this stuff. And, my mother had prepared me, like I got my sex talk when I was like 6 years old. There was no fear around that kind of stuff. But it was just like really, really hard for me to kind of navigate the world without my mom. And so let's just say I did not have a lot of inner peace. I really felt victimized by the world. I felt like the world was the cause of my suffering. I felt like I was at the effect of the world. And it was just really hard. And so I had decided that I was going to get my peace. Right. I was going to find my peace by finally getting the answers to what happened that night. And I knew my mom couldn't tell me because she was dead. My family wasn't talking about it, and I wasn't allowed to see the newspaper or the news. And now here we are. It's 1986, and I'm a freshman in college at BU. And so I devised this plan, right? Now, here's what I always say. I didn't tell anybody about this plan, nor did I know if I could actually pull it off. But when you're that young, like, you're not that smart. Like, you just think, I'm going to do this thing, right? So I had made a decision that I was going to finally get the answers, which meant I was finally going to have peace, right? Because I was going to go to the prison. I was going to talk to the guy that killed her. I was going to face him mano y mano, 1v1, like man to man or girl to man or whatever it was. And I was going to say, what happened that night? What did you do? Why did you do this? And I was finally going to know, and then I could rest. Like, I could set down the baggage and the victim story, right? Although at that time I did not see myself as a victim. I was righteous in my anger. Like, I thought I had every right to be pissed, right? And every right to feel bad for myself and all this stuff. So I devised this plan. I was in school. I was scared to death, you guys, that I was going to drop out of college. Like, scared to death that they were going to kick me out. Like, they were going to find out I was stupid, which I wasn't. But I was working so hard to stay in school, because the reality of it is we got a little insurance money from my mother's death. And I used that money to get into college to pay for my first year at BU. And I was terrified to let my mother down. I was like terrified to like spend my dead mother money and blow it, you know? And so I worked really hard. I actually ended up making Dean's List my first semester. I was so proud of myself. Yes. And so I was like, okay, I just have to finish getting through my finals. It's December 1986. I'm gonna finish getting through my finals. I had one more final to take, and then that was it. I was heading home to Lawrence for the holidays, and I was gonna on Christmas break go to the prison and talk to this guy. This is my plan. So it's the second last night before finals, before I head home, and my boyfriend at the time still lived in Lawrence. And back then I didn't have a phone in my room. I was trying to be conscious of the money. I was terrified I was going to run out of money. And so I would go down to the lobby of my dorm with like quarters in my flannel pants and my sweats or whatever. And I would like plug the quarters into the machine. And so I go down to call my boyfriend, and I call him and he picks up, and I can tell right away that he's being weird. I can tell right away from the sound of his voice and how extra nice he's being to me. And so I finally just said to him, what's going on? And the guy that killed my mom, his name was Paul Caravo, right? And he just says to me, Caravo is dead. And I lost my mind. I was like, what the fuck do you mean Paul Caravo is dead? When were you going to tell me? And he was like, Kay, we're so sorry. You know, you had finals. We didn't want to blah, blah, blah. And boom, like I hang up the phone on him, you know? And then as fast as I can fucking dial, quarter back in the phone, 603, like da, 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 I dial my sister's number. And before she can even finish saying hello, she's like, hello. I'm like, when the fuck were you going to tell me? And she's like, Kay, we didn't want to upset you. You had finals. Boom, I hang up the phone. And I just like booked it upstairs, like sobbing, running. Like, it's so dramatic now when I think about it, but like running up the stairwell to my room, my dorm room, which was on the 3rd floor. And like I slipped and I scraped the shit out of my shin and took probably like 5 or 6 inches of skin like off the front of my shin. And now I'm bleeding, and I run up to my room and I like throw myself on the bed, and I grab my stuffed animal, Scylla, who I still have to this day, and just cried my little eyes out. I was so crushed. I was like, this is it. This is my last chance to find peace. This is it. And you guys, I was devastated. But here's the thing, you guys. All of that, and there's more and more and more and more. Read the book, I always say. But here's the thing. Those beginnings, those humble beginnings of having trauma and drama and having to face the overcoming of it, like having to take a fearless look, right? Really step into what I call the fearless flow, which was a spiritual journey, right? If any of you know Joseph Campbell and you know the hero's journey, like I was launching my own hero's journey, and I had to figure out how to have my own peace that did not rely on external circumstances. I had to take the circumstances that life had given me. And a lot of times life will give us a situation and we turn it into a life sentence. And that's where I was heading. I was heading in that direction of poor me, victim, dead, murdered mother, never going to have my own peace, really looking outside of myself for the answers. And then a miracle happens when I moved to California. And I'll tell that story another time. But I will just say this, the overcoming of my own story and finding my own spiritual glory within that is what sparked me, and I always say, I have a helper's instinct, right? Call it a servant's heart, call it a desire to help. It's just the way I came through. And it's also how my mother was too. My mother was a love ambassador for both humans and animals. And I kind of have the same DNA, right? And my sister's like that too. My sister cares very much about people. And it's one of the reasons why I became vegan. Like I said, I've been vegan for 16 years. And partly it has to do because of that servant's heart. And it also has to do with a story about my mom, which I'll tell you about another time. And so all of this stuff, right? Be knowing that transition, the powerful stuff that can happen from moving from your story to your glory and being able to overcome pretty big things and being able to be helpful, right? That's what I always wanted to do, is I just wanted to help people. And so I always talk about it like this. And I kind of got this concept from Andre Dubus III, who is my writing mentor. His dad, Andre Dubus, who is the famous short story writer, beautiful, brilliant writer too. He talks about it like this. He was I was raised Catholic. He was a Catholic kid too. And he talks about the guilt of Catholicism and all this stuff. So a lot of time for Catholic kids, they have a hard time being successful. But this is what I always say. So this is where the original idea came from. If you make it to the top, if you're a kid who gets on the friggin' elevator and you make it to the top floors, you better send that sucker back down. So for me, it was me figuring out how to heal myself, how to forgive my mother's killer, how to overcome, right, these wounds, how to discover my strength within these places of great suffering and loss. I can't hold on to this stuff to myself. I need to share it with my brothers and sisters. And so that's what I do for work. And it's no surprise that I became a yoga teacher, right? After my mother is brutally beaten to death. The whole foundation of yoga is ahimsa, nonviolence. It's why some of my heroes are Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., because they were all about nonviolent resistance. They got some shit done in the world, but not by shooting people, not by raising their fists, right? They had soul force. They had love force. And that's what I'm here to do too. I'm not saying I'm Gandhi or Jesus or Martin Luther King Jr., but these are some of my heroes. I have a lot of female and women. You can see Oprah back there smiling at us. I have a lot of female and women heroes too. And you'll learn and all about them as we get to know each other better and as you keep tuning in. So that's the beginnings of my story. And obviously it goes on because that was 17 and I'm 50 now and a bunch of shit happened in between. I moved to Los Angeles. I met my spiritual teachers. I met some really cool people. And I came back here ultimately, you guys, to do research for the book and to really start to get the answers to what happened, to what the hell happened. And that's what we're going to talk a lot about on this show, is talking to people who are doing incredible things in the world, people that I find fascinating, people that I find remarkable. And the word remarkable, why I love it, the word remarkable means worthy of making a remark about. And I'm gonna share some people with you, friends of mine, people that I honor and love, that I can't wait to have them share their stories with you too. So this is going to be an opportunity for us to enjoy. I don't know about you, man, but I love a good story. And I love hearing about other people's experiences that I can relate to my own life and that they give me these little golden nuggets of wisdom. And I go oh yeah, I never thought about that before, or I never looked at it that way. People who I think are doing good in the world. That's really exciting to me. It's really easy to look around and hate each other and to find all the ways that we're separate or different or other people are the other. But what I'm interested in is what brings us together. What's the thing that unites us underneath it all? And for me, that's saying that we are children of God, that we're God's kids. And I always say, if you don't like the word like God, you're going to have to get used to hearing it on my show. But I'm not telling you what your God should be. This is about the God of your own understanding when I say that word. To me, all that God is all the love that's ever been given and received. It is the eternal light and love of the world. So if you want to think of it like an old white guy in a robe, that's up to you. If you want to call it goddess, universe, spirit, higher self, higher power. You don't even have a name for it. I don't give a shit. That's fine. But I'm just saying, I'm always looking for the thing underneath our differences, underneath our sexual orientation or gender orientation or sexual preferences or color of our skins, socioeconomic class, all those labels are of the world. I'm always looking for the thing beyond this world that unites us in truth and oneness. The thing where when we hear each other's stories, we go, oh man, yeah, I feel that, I get that. And thank you for being brave enough and ballsy enough and bodacious enough, or the chutzpah, to be vulnerable and to share your stories. So that's what we're going to do here. That's what we're going to do together. And I so hope you guys that you'll tune in. I'm doing a lot of cool and fun stuff in the world that I would love to share with you and invite you to. Obviously on this show, tune in here. And if you hear something you like or that you find helpful, share it with a friend, share it with your loved ones, share it with the people that you dig, or if somebody you know is having a tough time, could use a little burst of love, share it with them. And when I have guests on and stuff like that you appreciate, go to iTunes, subscribe, leave a comment, leave a review, let me know. I love to stay connected. That's a really big thing. I love to stay connected. I do retreats twice a year, one in May, one in November. That's a really fun way to come to New Hampshire to a really cool location and have an in-person experience. And I'm always also inviting people into my group coaching program. I have 2 6-month programs, and I have a new year-long program. It's a wicked deep dive into working one-to-one with me and overcoming your stories and finding your own glory. And in the meantime, we can stay connected here through the podcast and the video cast. And I just so appreciate you guys for tuning in. It means so much to me. So, episode 1 in the can. Yes, I'm so excited. And I'll be bringing these to you guys once a week, right? So we'll get to visit with each other here or there, and it's going to be fantastic. So here's the thing. I see you. I celebrate you. I appreciate you. And I love you. Wherever you go, you guys, be a blessing. Leave the people and the places better than how you found them. Thanks so much for tuning in. Bye. Hey, you guys, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Karen Kenney Show. I super duper appreciate your time, friendship, and support. And look, if something that I shared from my heart today somehow landed in yours, I'd love to hear about it. So please tag me on Facebook or Instagram or IG stories or wherever the cool kids are hanging out these days, and let me know what your favorite part was or what you found most helpful. You can find me over at Karen Kenney Live. That's Karen, KenneYlive. And if you're digging what I'm saying and you want to hear more, I'd be wicked grateful if you could go to iTunes and subscribe and leave a review, because you guys, that's how you'll help me to keep spreading the love. And if you can think of someone that could benefit from hearing this episode, please share it with them. I'd also love to stay connected with you. So if the feeling is mutual, please go to KarenKenney.com/freebie and download my free guide to building your spiritual team. Until next time, my brothers and sisters, keep living in the fearless flow. Know that I see you, I appreciate you, and I love you. And wherever you go, may you be a blessing.